All right, we're live. I think we're broadcasting. All right, welcome back. So on last week night was Tuesday, yes, so there we were introducing the course. We were talking a little bit about the agenda, what are the various topics that we're going to be covering, also we introduced the first assignment, right? That and the focus of the first week is to get you up and running with a development environment. And we spoke about the various pieces of that development environment. We said that we would be using OpenShift, right? And at OpenShift, we would be having several things happening at OpenShift. We would have we would create a Node.js server that's going to be hosting our web application remotely on their servers. Also, in OpenShift, we're going to be having a Git instance, right? That's going to be hosting all our source code, right, remotely on OpenShift. And so, I've asked you in the first assignment to open an account in OpenShift, invite me and the TAs. They haven't introduced themselves just yet, so just they should be doing it shortly. And this is going to be hosting the source code. Right, it's going to be hosting all the static files, right? So all the HTML, right? All the CSS, the JavaScript is going to be hosting here, right? And this is going to be live on the web, right? Anybody can, with a URL to your web application, is going to be able to use your particular web application. So anybody else with a browser, right? It's going to be able to hit your server, right? And view your great web application. Locally on your machine, you're going to be using WebStorm as an IDE. Right? Once you create your Node.js instance on OpenShift, it will give you a URL to the Git that is being hosted here at OpenShift. That URL, you will use it in WebStorm to point to the Git. Right? You'll give it the URL. And you will clone down, right, a copy, right, a carbon copy of all these files, right, locally on your machine. So you will have here the same files you have remotely. You'll have them right here. And the intent is that you will have a Node.js instance running on your machine, and you will be able to, from within WebStorm, start your Node server, right? And your Node server will execute the files locally on your machine, right? You'll do all your development locally on your machine. You'll test, right? You'll develop. Once you feel comfortable with this, when you've reached a stable state, you will commit, right? There's going to be a local Git, right? When you clone the Git repository, you're going to have a local version, right? A local copy of that repo, right? Once you're happy, and if you've added new files, you're gonna git add all your files. Once you've made changes and you've reached a stable state, you're gonna commit those changes. Commit. Right, -am, and perhaps add some comment, a small blurb explaining what you did. Once you've completed, you'll do several of these Git commits, locally. Once you're happy and you want to push it over, right? You want to make it available and deploy it remotely, you will do a Git push. Right, the Git push is gonna, because notice what happens is that now over here in your local copy, you're ahead, right? You have changes here that are not reflected in the remote server, right? So you want to synchronize these two. You're going to push, right? These are going to be copied over to the remote Git, right? It's going to be deployed. It's going to deploy your files. Right? It's going to restart the server. It's going to make your server momentarily unavailable, right? So anybody that visits you while you're redeploying, they'll get a service unavailable message. It'll redeploy, and then you'll have a carbon copy of what you have locally, and now you have it remotely. Okay? Right, that makes sense? And we'll do that today in class, just to give you an idea of what it looks like, right? All right. Also, I have mentioned that just to get an idea on what is it that we're building, just to go over that real quick. Let me erase this. So we're building. We're using a new philosophy of building web applications called single-page applications, right? I mentioned it perhaps on Tuesday, where most of the dynamic manipulation of the user interface happens at the client, right, on the browser, as opposed to in some of the more legacy or more classical dynamic pages. Usually happens on the server, right? You run JSPs or PHP or ASPs, all these technologies, right? They render dynamic content on the server, right? You have your logic, your if statements, your for loops, all embedded inside of JSPs or PHPs or ASPs, right? And they generate dynamic HTML that gets pumped back to the browser, right? So this has been this way for a decade or more, right? Lately we've transitioned and moved a lot of that logic, right, over to the client, right? So a lot of the dynamic content that we're going to be generating is on the client side, right, using JavaScript, Angular, right, the MVC JavaScript library that we're going to be using. The dynamic portion happens on the client, on the browser. So let's review a little bit the architecture, right? So you have Node.js, right, which is going to be basically it's just a JavaScript interpreter, right? Which uses Express. Express is a Node.js library, right? That makes it very easy to within a few lines of code, you can have a running server using Node.js, right? Very lightweight, extremely fast to start up, and it scales very well. Right? So you have Node.js running either locally on your machine or remotely. It doesn't matter. You have a server running, right? And your server is hosting several static pieces of content, right? So your HTML, JavaScript, CSS, right? And you have browsers here, right? Here's your browser. From within your browser, you're going to be accessing one particular file, right? For now, it'll be just an index file, index, right? Which is going to be your, perhaps your main page, your splash page, right? Your home page, right? That you come, that you visit first, right? HTML comes down, right? It copies locally on your machine. So this is your local machine, and this is Node.js either running locally on your machine or running remotely, right, in somebody else's machine on OpenShift. Regardless, right, you can think of this as being remote, right? A server running somewhere on the network, either local, right, 127.0.0.1, right, or across the world. You ask for this file, a physical file, right, and this HTML gets copied, and now you have it here, index.html. Notice there's no dynamic content here, right? This is as far as the server is concerned. Right, the index HTML is just static content, right? It's just plain text, right? It hasn't executed anything, right? There are even though there might be logic or if then whatever. As far as the server is concerned, this is static text, right? So it does not interpret it. It does not run any logic on it. It just verbatim passes all the text back over here. I'm pointing this out because in other courses you might have used other technologies, or other dynamic technologies such as JSPs or ASPs or PHP, where in those cases they are interpreted, right? They are executed on the server, right? The embedded logic in here, it gets compiled, right? Gets executed, and the HTML gets calculated, right? A stream of text goes back, but it's a calculated piece of text. Yes? Instead of just this being plain text. Anyway, so we got the plain text here. Index.html is going to reference several other things. It's going to reference other resources back from the server. It says, oh, I need certain JavaScript, right? Certain CSS, right? I'll go back, right? The browser parses the index.html and says, oh, you need certain JavaScript. Let's go back. Let's go back in another request and says, let's download the JavaScript and the CSS back. Well, here now you have a copy of your JavaScript, right, and the CSS. Plus, it might the page might reference other JavaScript and CSS libraries out there in the cloud, right? Maybe from Bootstrap, from Google, from Angular, from jQuery, right? So these are all code repositories that live elsewhere, right, at a particular server, and you might reference them. It says I want to download jQuery, right? I want to download Bootstrap. I want to download all sorts of other resources from the web, right? And they will be copied also locally. So some it will fetch from your server because you own these, right? Plus, it'll download some other stuff from the web, right? That it needs also static content, more static content. Brings it down. Once you have it here, this index.html might have embedded, okay, some JavaScript that will dynamically, the JavaScript might dynamically update what the browser renders, right? Will dynamically update. It will decide that certain portions are to be viewed now, maybe later, right? Under certain conditions, when you hover over them or when you click on them, it displays certain things and not displays certain things. It becomes a very, very dynamic piece of content, right? So it is here that the dynamic portion happens. We're not going to use plain old JavaScript, right? We're going to be to help us out in creating this dynamic logic, right? This dynamic content. We're going to use a library called Angular, Angular.js, right? Which facilitates, makes it easy to create this dynamic content on the front end, plus jQuery. Okay, so Angular and jQuery we'll use to dynamically handle this. Now, what happens here is that oftentimes we will need, this HTML doesn't have any data to render, right? It might have all the layout, how to lay out the top, the sidebars, the bottom, right? It will know how to lay out maybe a table. It knows how to lay it out, but it will not have actual data to render, right? So what will happen is that data we need to go fetch it again. We don't have any database here. We don't have anything here, right? So the JavaScript is going to dynamically go back to the server, right, and ask for data. It says, I am rendering the latest recipes, right? Give me all the recipes, right? Or sports teams, or movies, or songs, or whatever, right? Whatever your particular domain object is for your particular project. Okay, it's going to go back and to your URL. Maybe it says recipes, right? Or teams, right? Or songs, right? It'll use a URL to do a get. It'll do a get, right? Programmatically using the Angular or jQuery libraries, right? It will hit these URLs, and Node.js is to say, okay, these are not static, as opposed to index.html, right? When I asked for index, that was static, right? But these are not static. We'll see how do we do that. It says for this, I'm going to have to go to a database to fetch the data, right? We'll map URLs. We'll map URLs to functions, right? To JavaScript functions. That will do a database connection, right? We'll do a query, right? We'll retrieve, we'll massage the data, right? We'll put it in the right format and respond with JSON. Respond with JSON. The JavaScript that did the request, right, uses that JSON to then dynamically update the UI. That make sense? Right? Notice that as the UI changes, right, even navigating from different parts of the application to other parts of the application, the index page never reloads. Right? The index page was downloaded only once, right? And you never leave that page, even though you might be navigating from different sections of your application. I want to go to the about page, that contact us, or feedback, or admin, and there might be dozens of sections, various sections, right? What we normally call pages, right? There might be many, many pages. We never actually reload the physical page, right? We, as we navigate through the various sections, Angular.js is going to ask for snippets. There will be several other HTML. There will be many of these, right? And many of HTML templates, which will be dynamically, just like we ask for data, we're going to do a get, right, under the covers, and get and ask for this snippet of HTML without reloading the index of HTML. We'll ask for snippets, right, and then position them dynamically when we need it, on demand, right? Angular.js, allows us to encode all this logic of what gets to get loaded when, right? The usual mechanism is that you create hyperlinks, right? And these hyperlinks typically would refer to physical files, other physical .html files, right? We're not gonna do that, right? Instead, there's a module called routing and navigation, Angular's, that gives you the same functionality, right, of being able to navigate through many pages, but using the single page implementation, right? That we do this dynamically on demand, right? And we update the DOM accordingly to give you the same functionality, but implement it in a different way, right? Single page applications. Make sense? All right. Okay, so let me illustrate how we would do the creation of the OpenShift account and what that would entail. So let me share my screen. So I'm going to try and do this from scratch, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Gmail. I'm going to create a brand new email account. I'm just going to say, I'll call it JGA Web Dev Spring 2016. And this is section 1, right? Section 1. Yeah, I'm that old. And this is 3602. I'm not a robot yet. Really? Text message. Oh, two-way authentication. Come on. Hello, come on, come on. Enter the, didn't get a code. It's been longer than that. Try again. Oh, there we go. So it's 285460. All right, so I'll copy this this email. Copy, and I'll go over to OpenShift. It's not charging. Why is it not charging? All right, so you go to OpenShift with your email, and we'll sign up for free. And we'll put the that email address. Are you a spam bot? No. 561058. Sign up. So it sends me an email, and you will respond to it. So you will verify your email. And we got an email from OpenShift. There it is, OpenShift email, and we'll say verify your account. We will accept. And one of the first things that we'll ask you is if you want to create an application. We'll say, yes, we want to create an application, a web application. We'll say, create your first application. And it'll give you a choice of what type of applications you want to create. You can create Java applications with JBoss. Right? You can create PHP applications, Ruby, Python, Django, Node.js. So we're going to use Node.js, right? And we'll select Node.js. Yes. No, we'll keep it simple. That one uses a particular template, right? So, we'll give it a name for this. So it'll be web dev. What do we say? Spring 2016. Is that what I said? I forget. Right. And here you'll use your last name and first name. Okay. But yes. Ooh, sorry. Thank you. You use the last name, first name. Instead, I'm going to use the email, although I believe that's way too long. So I'll just say Spring 2016, section 1, or 01. Maybe I think that's short enough. GGA Web Dev 2003. Okay. And I'm going to say yes, create application. All right, so this is going to take a while. It's going to take a couple minutes. It's going to clone their Node.js, right? Their environment. I'm going to create an instance for me. It's going to create a default web application, right? With a simple hello world web application. So while that's running, you should have already installed Node.js locally on your machine. And so you should be able to type Node, right? And it goes into an interpreting command line input, right? And you can type things here, but let's use it to run just very simple JavaScript, right? I mean, that's all Node is, right? Node is just a command line JavaScript interpreter. Right? You give it a JavaScript file, it executes it locally. So what's the big deal there? So typically when we talk about JavaScript, we say, oh, it's the web programming language, right? And we usually associate it with client-side browser programming, right? We can when it gets downloaded in a browser, we can do all sorts of things, right? We can manipulate the user interface, right? We can interact with the user. We can do animation. We can add content, remove content dynamically, open up windows, resize it. We can do all sorts of things on the browser, user interface specific things, right? On a desktop, we don't have a user interface, right? But we have other things, right? We don't have, unlike the browser, right? JavaScript running in a browser, in the browser, we don't have access to the file system, whereas here we do, right? On a browser, we don't have access to, or we have limited network connectivity, right? Whereas over here, we have full-blown access to networks, where we can do everything we want. On a browser, we don't have access to databases, right? We have to use some kind of proxy to go fetch data elsewhere, right? Whereas over here, on the desktop, we have full access to the to a database, right? So there's lots of things that we can't do here that you can do on the browser, and vice versa, right? So what we're going to have is we're going to have JavaScript on the browser, right, and JavaScript on the desktop, collaborating, right, to be able to give many more features, right, always using the same language, right? So that's one benefit, right? It's one less language to learn. So let's just create here a very simple file. Let me start WebStorm. Is it done? Oh, it's done. Okay. Will you be changing? Okay, so let's go back to OpenShift, right? Let's go back to OpenShift. It says, will you be changing the code exactly? Yes, certainly. We want to work with the code. It says, yes, help me get started. Yes. So one of the first things that it asks you says, I need some security, public keys for us to be able to communicate securely. And I already have an SSH key locally on my machine. I can show you here. It's on Macs, they're stored under .ssh. I believe in Windows the same thing, right? On your home directory, there should be a .ssh directory, and under there you should have a public key. Here I'm going to display it. It's under. It's this one, ID. It's this one. Notice that it's identified for the OpenShift key, right? If you've downloaded the RHC tools, right, when you first set it up and you run RHC setup, right, it's going to ask you to log in. You'll need to provide your username, your password, right? The same username and password that you use for OpenShift, right? And one of the first things that's going to ask you to do is, do you want me to create a set of keys? You say, yes, certainly, I want you to create the keys. And it says, do you want me to upload them? Yes, I want you to upload them, right? I've done this already, so that's why I have a key, right? I'm only copying it here so I can paste it in this brand new OpenShift server that I want to connect to. I want to use the same key across many of my applications. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to go back and paste it. And we'll save. Okay, there it is. It says, okay, I've created a dummy, a simple hello world application for you. You can clone it down, right? So it put all the. Am I sharing? Let me make sure I'm sharing. Yes, I am sharing. You can clone it down either at the command line using Git, using Git clone and then that long URL, right? And then it'll create a directory with the name that you gave it, right? Web Dev Spring 2016. You'll be able to go in there, and all your source code is there, right? The same source code that it created for the default application. Right? You can go in there and start mocking around with it, right? Instead of using the command line, you can certainly do this, right? Instead of using the command line, I'm going to use WebStorm, right? Because it's the main mechanism we're going to be using to interact with the web application, the main development environment. Right? So we're going to copy that URL. That's the URL. Right? I'm going to go to WebStorm. Loading. So this is loading last night's project that I was working on. Right, I'm just going to close it. Right, I'm going to reopen it and clone down from OpenShift. Okay, so let's close this. Right, and one of the options that it gives me is that do you want to open either an existing project locally in your machine, or do you want to clone down from a Git repository? It says, yes, I want to use Git. Right? I'm going to paste here the URL, right? And it says all my projects are under here, under my home project directory. And I'm going to give it a name of the directory where I wanted to copy all my work. So I'm going to say CS5610, Spring 2016. Is section 1. Okay? All right, I'm going to say, is a malformed? No. What's wrong with? Oh, no clone, just SSH. Okay? I'm going to clone it down, and it's going to go out to Git, right? It's going to start bringing down, it says, wants to make sure that the keys, the public keys, is the one I want to use. I'll say yes. And okay, I've copied it over. Do you want to open up the directory I just created? Right, the project. It will open it up. And now what I have is a local copy of the project that is being hosted back on the server. Okay. All right. Let's see what it contains. Let's see. It has a couple of things. We have a server.js. Right. So server.js is it's a JavaScript file. If we open it up, it's just plain old JavaScript. Okay, but there's some magic happening here, right? It's loading a certain library, right? The Express library, the one that I've been telling you about. It's loading a file system module so that it can interact with the file system. It's setting up an IP address that our server is going to be listening at. It's setting up also the port where it's going to be listening at. Okay. Right, so we'll come back to this. There's quite a few things happening here. Right, so coming back here, I've cloned this. Let's see what it created for us remotely, right? And what have we cloned down to our local? We're going to say continue to the application overview page. So this is kind of like the dashboard, right? That lists all the various web applications that I am hosting, all the servers that I'm running. I only have one, right? One Node.js server. You can add other things. You can add a MongoDB, which you will later on in a couple weeks. We will be adding the MongoDB cartridge. Right now, just Node.js, right? It's already running, and that's the URL, right? That's the URL of the web application we just created. If you click on it, this is the default web application. It's just an index page. Right? This is the index page that it provides, right? It just says, welcome to your Node.js application, blah, 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 and just some blurb on how to use it. Right? Just saying that this is the default index. It's this index. It's this index right here. This index page right here. Okay. All right, so here's WebStorm. It's aggressively telling me, hey, you have new content locally on your file system that all of a sudden appeared. Do you want me to add it? Right, so I'm going to say no. I don't want you to add anything. I want to have full control. I don't want you to implicitly add things. Right? I'm going to say no. Not for now, anyway. No. Cancel. Okay. So it's this index page, and we'll come back to this in a minute. For now, let's create a couple of JavaScript files just to get us going on what it is that you can do, what Node.js it's all about. Let's create a JavaScript file that very simple. It just says hello. All right, so I'm gonna delete the content. It's just a simple file. Notice that it's at the root of my directory. I could see that it's also locally available here. So this one is the one I just created, right? CS5610, Spring 2016, Section 1. So I can copy that and go in there. And you'll notice that it's the same content. Notice the hello.js that I've just created, right? So in there, I'm going to just say something very simple. Just going to say console.log. No, hello world. Jello. Hello world. Can't type today. Hello world. So I can see that indeed it's that, right? There it is, console hello world, right? And Node.js, the only thing it is, right? I want to play down what Node.js is. All by itself, Node.js is not much, right? It just interprets the JavaScript, right? And it executes it, right? So if I say node, that's the interpreter, right? And I give it the hello.js, it executes it. It just says hello world, right? That's what it says, console.log. If this were executing on a browser, it would execute the text hello world. You would see it on the JavaScript console, right? When you inspect your page. Here, because we don't have a browser, we don't have a UI, it's just it spits it out to the standard output, right? So yeah, so that's all Node is, right? You obviously you can do all sorts of things here. You can have for loops, if statements, classes, all right? You can have instances, arrays, objects, also all sorts of things that you would expect in a full-blown programming language, right? So I'm not gonna bore you with that. Everything you would expect to do with JavaScript, you can do here, right? with the benefit that now you have access to a file system, you have full access to a network, you have full access to talk to databases. All right? Okay. All right. So that's all hello.js is, right? So let's go back to our server.js. So our server.js is a fairly complex piece of JavaScript, right? That what it does is that it starts a server, right? It starts a server and it just waits for incoming HTTP requests, right? It's this over here, the Node.js instance running, right, waiting for incoming HTTP requests. And for now, the only thing that it knows how to do is to serve this index page. That's all it knows how to do. Right? Certainly, we're going to be adding complexity to this, right? But before we get complex, let's get simple. Let's get real simple. First of all, let's try and running this server locally, right? If we run it locally, server.js, right? It's going to complain. It's going to say, hey, you tried to load this library Express. Notice that that's one of the first lines in server.js, right? It says require Express, right? So Node.js uses this keyword require, right? Very similar like you would in Java, you would do import, right? Or in C++, you would do includes, right? It refers to somebody else's code, right? That is compiled, it's ready to go. I want to bring that library in. It's creating a local variable that refers to that library, right? And then you can make calls, you can make instances of it, you can do all sorts of things. I'm not going to get into the details just yet. I just want to point out that it's complaining. It's complaining that I do not have this library locally, right? So that brings us to the next Node.js piece of software that is also installed when you download and install Node, right? NPM, right? So NPM stands for Node Package Manager, right? And it's meant to handle all these modules, right? For instance, one of them being Express, right? If you navigate to npmjs.org, right, you'll get a list of the various packages or modules, Node.js modules that are available, right? These are all open source modules, right? You can freely use them, and there's all sorts of modules. Anything you can possibly think of is available here, right? There's image manipulation, right? There's creating documents, interacting with databases, interacting with all sorts of web services out there. If you want to communicate with PayPal or Bloomberg or Yahoo, or you want to communicate with all sorts of these web services, there should be a package here for you, right? And what you need to do is install those libraries locally, right? And you do that through the npm install mechanism, right? So here, back at the command line, we do npm install, and then the package that we want to install, right? Now these packages all have unique names, right? And and those names are proliferating, very, very quickly, right? Express is one of the earlier ones, and I can certainly install it this way. I can just say npm install Express. Okay, I can do that, and if I do that, right, it's going to go and connect to npmjs.org, right, to their servers, and it's going to start pulling down those libraries, right, and it's going to copy it locally on my machine, right, and it's going to put it in this particular directory. It's going to put it in this directory. See here, it says node_modules. See that? It appeared. It used to be empty. It used to be empty, but now it's got a new directory in there called Express. You see that? Well, it wasn't there originally. It was not there. And it's now installed locally on my machine, right? And npm is smart enough to, depending on your machine, it will compile right to the correct to the right architecture, right? So that's one way that it can be installed. Excuse me. And notice that it printed out several things that it went out and fetched packages that it depended on, right? So certain packages depend on other packages, right? And packages are aware of these dependencies, right? If you need to install Express, well, you also have to install these other packages, right? And it resolves all these dependencies, downloading all the various libraries, installing them, copying them locally. Okay, so that's one way. Another way, all right, so I'm going to blow away what it generated. I'm just going to remove it. Another way to install it is to take a look at the package JSON. So package JSON describes your project, right? It's meta information about your project. Who the author is, right? How can you contact the author of this project, right? Where is it being hosted, right? There's all sorts of meta information about your particular project, right? One of the more interesting things is the dependencies, right? The dependencies where a project lists the dependencies, says, I cannot execute, right? This project cannot execute unless these libraries are also installed, right? And here it's explicitly saying that I depend on Express, right? If I don't have Express, I'm going to fail, right? And indeed it did, right? When we tried to run it. So another way we can Express is to make use of these dependencies, right? We can just basically at the command line just say npm install. So if we don't say the package or module that we want to install, right, it's going to take a look at, next it's going to look at the package JSON file and going to say, all right, let's see, what are the things you need. Right, it's going to open it up, parse it, go look at the dependencies, and I'm going to do the same thing. It's going to download and install the packages that it needs. There it is. It did the same exact thing. Now we have, again, if we refresh, there it is. Express is installed. All right, everybody okay? All right. Yes. You can install locally, right? If you don't say anything, it's by default locally, only for this particular project, right? But you can give it an extension, an option that you want global, right? So -- global, right? Will install the package for everybody, right? So it'll be accessible all throughout all your projects. Okay. All right. Also, package JSON. The importance of package JSON is also that yes. Yes. Yeah, if it's not globally installed, you have to download it for each one of the local project, right? What do you mean other dependencies? Dependency and the Oh, so depending on the environment that you're running, like for instance, oftentimes when you're on a development machine, right, you want to have certain libraries that you don't want to be running on the production machine or the test machines, right? You might have certain libraries that you want to use in certain development environments, right? So it says, so you can say, hey, I want to install those libraries only on my test machine, right? I don't want to litter, right, any of the libraries in the production environment or the QA environment, right? So you could divvy up, right, and have different environments. You can have different versions of the libraries, right, running locally, but other versions running on a production environment. So you can divvy up those kinds of things. Yeah.
We have listed out the dependencies. So when we do an npm install,
yes,
we clone the project. So how it would come to know that it's a development machine? We have to provide some options.
Yeah, there's options that you can tell what environment it is. That's one of the many options that you have with npm install.
So if I only write npm install, it is
just look at the dependencies. Yes, that's the default. That's the default, right? Also, the importance of this particular file, right, is that say I want to use a new package, right, a new module. Say I want to do image manipulation, right, and there's a nice library that does that, right, that allows me to upload files, crop files, right, and resize files and things like that, right. And I install it locally on my machine, right? So I do npm install. Phantom is one of these libraries, Phantom.js. And what I'll do is then install it locally on my machine. So now under Node modules in my machine, my development machine, it'll add a directory, for Phantom.js, right? That for this package. But my remote machine doesn't have it, right? I have it only in my local machine, right? So somehow I need to make it. I need to make that dependency. Add that dependency here in the package.json, because what happens is that when I push my code, right, my server is going to open up package.json and it's going to do the same thing I did in the command line, npm install, right? So on the server, when it restarts, right, the first thing that it's going to do, right, is going to do an npm install. It's going to open up your package.json, right? Look at any dependencies and says, oh, you have on your machine, you have those libraries. I need them as well in the production environment, right? It'll open them up, right? It'll download and install the package for that particular architecture, right? And compile for that particular architecture. And now both of us have the same libraries. Now the way we introduce these dependencies is that, for instance, if I want to do npm install, I think it's called Phantom.js. If I do this, right, it's going to install just locally on my machine, right? But if I wanted to reflect as this being an actual dependency of the project, meaning I can't run unless I have this, right? I can add one of many options. There's tons of options. One of them is save, right? It says update my package.json so that it reflects this dependency, right? So it reflects this dependency. So I think it's called Phantom.js. Yeah, so it's downloading Phantom.js, and it's going to add that dependency in my package.json file. And there's tons of other uses for the package.json, but this is definitely the one that we're going to need. Anyways, downloading it. Okay, it's done. If we go back, notice that now my dependencies now lists Phantom as a dependency. You see that? Right? If I now send my entire set of files back to my server, right? My server is going to redeploy, right? It's going to restart the server. But before it restarts the server, right, it's going to call and it's going to do an npm install, right? It's going to reinstall Express, it's going to reinstall Phantom. I'm sorry, well, it's the first time it installs Phantom. But it's going to download and install any new packages that I need, right? If it's MongoDB packages because I want to connect to a database, if it's other packages that I want to connect to MySQL, or want to connect to PayPal, or whatever new packages I add here, I have to remember, right, when I do an install npm, so I have to say -- save, right, so that it adds it as a dependency, so that when I push it remotely, that too will have the same libraries. Make sense? Okay. Notice that I have Phantom here now, right? I don't really want Phantom. It was just for illustration purposes, so I'm just going to remove it. And I'm just going to remove Phantom. All right, let's see what else can we do. Let's change index, right? So index, okay, wait, we should be able to run it locally now, right? We install Express. We have Express locally. Let's try it. So we can go back to the terminal and start node server.js, or you can do it right from within WebStorm. We have a terminal here, right? We're already in the right directory, and we can say node server.js. Node server.js. The name of this file is very important. It has to be server.js. It can't be anything else. Okay, it's a convention. It's a convention, right? That this is the file where you configure the server, right? OpenShift is going to look for this file, and it's going to do a node server.js. It's going to run your server.js, and that's going to be your server, right? So don't call it anything else, right? This particular file has to be called server.js. You can create a whole bunch of other files. For instance, my hello.js, even though I'm going to push it in a few minutes, in a few seconds, it's just going to be ignored. Right? There's no way for me to refer to it unless I refer to it from server.js. Right? Everything starts at server.js. Right? Everything starts there. Anyway, so index run server node server.js. I'm going to run it. Okay, it's running. Let's see. Let me just look at server. It looks like it's listening at an IP address. I'm guessing localhost, and it's listening at 8080. That's a common development port. So let's go here and try to hit that. Let's say localhost and 8080. Oops. If you notice, it's exactly the same content, right, as my remote server. Right, this is on the remote machine, and this is on my local machine. Local, remote, they're identical, right? So I can't start my, just doing implementation. So this is the splash screen, right? This is the home page. This is going to be your home page, right? Although soon enough we're going to move it around. We're going to put it in a different place, right? But nevertheless, there will be a home page, and your home page, right, should be spectacular. Okay, your home page should be should reflect the effort that you're putting into the course, right? You should feel proud of your home page, right? You should be proud to take this URL. Take this URL. This is a server that belongs to you. It's your server, right? For this particular course, you should feel proud that you can copy this URL and send it to your next employer, right? So check this out. Check what I've implemented. Right? This reflects my skills, right? My web development skills, right? And also it's going to affect your grade, right? Right. I'm going to look at your homepage, right? And I should be proud to share your URL, right, with other colleagues. So check this out. Check what my students are doing, right? And if I don't feel proud, right, then a grade of A is questionable, right? So please make every effort to make this look spectacular, right? Well, everything should look spectacular, right? From your index page, yes. Yeah. Yes, that's a file system. Yep. Yeah, some libraries are standard libraries, right? And a file system is one of them. File system is one of those libraries that are already part of the framework, right? So Express is not. Express is a third-party library, and that has to be installed separately. Yeah, thank you.
And the other question is, how does server.js take the index file?
Yep. Yeah, we'll do it in a minute. Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. Yes. We're actually going to simplify that file a lot, right? We're going to simplify drastically. Okay, and instead of having several dozens of lines, it'll just have no more than 10 lines of code. Much easier to understand. What was I saying? From your homepage, you will also have references to your assignments, right? To your project, perhaps other things that you're of interest. It'd be great if you put a picture of yourself here. Maybe references to other courses that you're taking. Anything that you think reflect on you. Perhaps your resume, links to all sorts of things that we should know. Maybe LinkedIn should be perhaps a link connected here as well. Anyway, so let's make a small change to our index page. Let's see, we can search for this. This is the index page. Right, we can search it. There it is. Right. So let's make a very simple change, and we'll say welcome to CS5610. Okay, just that. If I refresh locally, notice that it doesn't change. Okay, I need to restart the server. So let's restart the server real quick. We'll fix that in a minute. Where is it? Terminal. I'm going to stop it, Control-C, and I'm going to restart it. And so locally, if I refresh, see my change, right? Welcome to CS5610. And I want my changes to reflect on the remote server, right? So to do that, I'm gonna stop this. I'm gonna commit my changes, and I'm gonna push it these changes over to remote server. So if I go to my version control tab here, we'll notice that there's quite a few things. There's 1,500 files, new files. What is that? Okay, we certainly didn't do that much change, right? Well, some of these 1,500 files is because of the new module that we added, right? Express, right? That has quite a few things in there. Also here, if we we can browse and see what's there that it's missing. Some files are under Node module, right? The Express there, my new hello.js file, right? My .idea, right? That's a hidden folder. That's a folder that has meta information about my IDE, right? So certainly my IDE, I don't want my development, my host machine to, it doesn't care about my IDE, right? So certainly I don't want to push that, right? And there's 7 files there. So what we want to do is somehow manage what it is that we want to keep track of, right, in our Git account. So what we're going to do is create an ignore file, a new file called .git ignore, right? And any or directory that I add here will be ignored by Git, right? Certainly my .idea, I don't want that, right? So I'm going to add here .idea. Save that. If I go back, notice that the unversioned files fell down from 1,500 to 300, right? It says all these notice that my .idea folder is not listed here, right? So it's going to ignore any of those files. What about Node_modules? Well, Node_modules is going to have what? It's going to have third-party libraries, right? That are being copied down, right, from npm. And we certainly had to do that. We're using npm install. And I know the remote server is going to do the same thing, npm install and download the library. So it makes no sense to keep track of these files in our source control, right? These are files that are dynamically re-downloaded, reinstalled, right, on demand for the environment. So we're going to add Node_modules also to the git ignore, right? So we're going to add here Node_. Can you even read that? Node_modules. Right, so I'm going to save that. Notice that now my unversioned files are just 2. Right? We have .gitignore, which I just added, and the hello.js. Right? So we can, and it's keeping track and says that you change index. Right now it says welcome CS5610, and you change package JSON. We did. What did we do? Yeah, but then I removed it, didn't I? Oh, it's just spaces, just new lines. Okay, so added, removed it, so it added some new spaces. Anyway, we're going to add these 2 files. New change list. Can I add it here? Yes, I can add it here. So they're being added, or I could have done it from the terminal, just git add. Right, and dot just adds everything. Any new file would be added there, or you can see what actual files have changed. Right, you can say git status. Will tell you, these files have changed. These are new files that are we're not tracking. Right. So now that I have everything, we can just go and select all these files and push here this VSS and commit it. Commit these changes, it's going to open up so you can commit your changes and say change index.html added hello.js. I'm going to commit and push. So your commit, right? Some file. Oh wait, can't cancel. Oh, so there's some code analysis that you can add or to-do list just to remind you that you need to do certain things. I'm just going to uncheck that. Push. So what's going to happen now? It's going to start pushing it from your local Git repository to the remote Git repository, right? And it's going to restart. It's going to do npm install, right? It's going to restart the server, right? And deploy your changes. And that's going to take just a little bit. While we're at it, we'll notice that if I go to remote and I try to refresh, it says that it's temporarily unavailable, and because it's busy restarting the server. This also happens when you come back to your application after a long period of inactivity. Right? They're all free accounts, right? After a while of not using these servers, it automatically shuts down the server, right? So when you come here, it's unavailable. If you just give it a couple minutes, right, it will restart the server, right? It identifies the incoming request, it restarts the server, and after a little while, you'll be able to use your application. Okay, so don't freak out if it's temporarily unavailable. It'll come back online a couple minutes later. Okay, let's try again. We refresh, and there it is. So remotely, now the index page is exactly the same as ours locally. Okay, so this is locally, and that's remote. Right. So this is the kind of the process that you're going to be following all throughout the semester. Right? You're going to be doing local development, local commits, lots of commits. Right. You do something that is even spell checking or doing some styling. Right. That's worth a commit. It's worth a commit. Right. So do lots of many frequent commits, small and frequent commits. Obviously, don't commit something that you know it's broken, right? Make sure that you are at a stable state, right? And any one of your commits is worthwhile pushing to the remote. So what you might do is do 2, 3, 4, 5 commits a day, small ones, and at the end of that day, you do a push, right? You do a push, and it gets deployed on the remote machine. Okay. I will ask you that I didn't mention this. I believe I mentioned it on Tuesday that we're going to keep track of 2 repositories, right? There's the OpenShift Git, right, which is tied to your WebStorm, right? And you're going to be pushing and pulling and whatnot. I am going to ask you to keep track of another Git account at GitHub. This is it's going to be a free public. Okay. Now, the only reason I want you to have this mirror Git, right, is that I want to keep track of what you're doing. Right. I want to keep track of the history of your commits. Right. And GitHub gives you all these nice graphical representations of what have you been up to. Okay. For instance. I could see that perhaps you haven't been doing a lot recently, right? And you have all these spikes, right? Where you don't do anything for 2 weeks, right? And all of a sudden you do a spike of work, right? And then again another prolonged time of inactivity, and then this huge spike, right? Instead, what I want to see is a nice, smooth, right, progression that you have been working at it, right? You've been busy, that even if it's small things, right? Even if it's small things, right? You make sure that there's, oh no, I should just spend 15, 20 minutes, 30, an hour, just doing something, committing that, pushing it, right? So that you have a nice, smooth curve, right? And that, right? So the second GitHub is only to just keep track of your progress, right? I mean, I could do the same. I could extract this information from your OpenShift Git, right? But it's just so much more convenient at GitHub. It gives me all these statistical tools of the activities. All right? Right? And I'm asking you to please invite me to both. Invite me to your OpenShift Git and invite me to your GitHub Git. Okay? And I believe there's instructions on how to add a second Git remote to your. So what you do is you're going to do a Git push. By default, this will push to your OpenShift. Yes, right. Whereas when you add the second remote, right, you'll need to specify that you want to push also to that other Git. So if you call it, I don't know, if you call it maybe GitHub or something, right? You'll need to do, Git push, and then the name of that remote that you gave it, right? So you have to say, maybe you called it, GitHub. Okay, so if you don't say anything, by default, it'll push you to OpenShift, right? And don't forget to also do a git push, right, to the other remote. Right? Or maybe you could do a small script that will do both, right? When you push, maybe do a push.bat or push.sh, right? That does first the git push and then the git push to your GitHub. Okay, make sense? All right. All right. So I did mention that this server.js is fairly involved. It's fairly involved. So let's simplify this, right, and make sense of what's going on here, right? How is it that we can create servers? Let's create servers. And we're using Express, right? So let's create a very simple server that we can understand in just a few lines of code, right? So to do that, let's navigate to Express. So if you go to Express JS. Okay, so this is the homepage of the library Express.js that we're using to create servers. Right, not only create servers, but any manipulation that you want to do with HTTP requests, right? Requests, responses, right? Express is your library, right? Express makes it very easy to respond to HTTP requests, generate responses, format the data you want to send back and forth, host static pages, very, very easy. Right? So, and there it is. So here's a command line that you would use for Express. This is what we did early on, right? Let's go with using the latest version of Express, and it says that the first thing you should do is this. And let's copy that. Let's copy that. So I'm going to blow away. I'm going to blow away the server.js, the default server.js that came with OpenShift. It's way too complicated, right? I am going to keep the first two lines though, right? Of loading the Express library and then creating an instance of that Express library, right? So app is an instance, right, of that library, right? Okay, let's keep going. Then here is the simplest of servers. These are the simplest of servers. Just a few lines of code, right? This is the simplest of server. This says start listening at the local host, right? A local 127.0.0.1. That's the default IP address that I'm going to listen at. Listen at port 3000, right? So it's app.listening at 3000. So this is going to start the server and listen at 3000, and it's going to block. It's going to wait forever as long as Node.js is running. It'll just wait forever for any incoming HTTP request at that IP address at that port. Okay, so yeah, so 3 lines of code. If you got a server. Okay, the rest here, these lines of code, which is basically just 2 lines of code, right, is me telling it what to do when certain HTTP requests come in. I can tell it if the request has nothing, it's at the root, right? If it has nothing, meaning the default at the root, then I want you to generate the following response. Okay, and the way it works is that, excuse me, the way it works is that it uses this function. So we have an instance of Express, right? Now it's an object. It has all sorts of methods in there, right? That we can invoke. One of them is .get, one of the functions, and get function allows you to configure URL patterns. Right? It allows you to configure a mapping, right? A mapping between URL patterns, right, and executables. What do you want to do? What do you want to happen when this particular URL pattern comes in? What happens? I will invoke this function. Notice this function. It's kind of a weird function, so maybe from some of you, right? Notice that it's a function inside of a function call, right? Notice that get is a function call, right? And in function that has no name, right? It's kind of like an anonymous function, right? some of you might be taken aback by the syntax. Maybe an easier syntax might be, right, if I put the function out here, right, and give it a name. Right now, it's not an anonymous function. It's an actual function that has a name, yes? So that might be an easier syntax for you to understand, right? It's a real function. And here I can configure that says, if you see this URL pattern, invoke this function. Okay, maybe this is a little easier for you to read. But the other syntax of embedding functions inside of function calls is very, very common in JavaScript. Okay, very common. You'll see it all over the place, right? So you should start getting used to that kind of syntax, right? It has a reason why it's so common, but the reason perhaps is it has more validity on the client side, on the browser side, right? On the browser side, you're coding, you're creating your own JavaScript, yes, but you're also maybe downloading somebody else's JavaScript, right? You're downloading maybe Yahoo, maybe you're downloading Bootstrap, you're downloading jQuery, right? And these are somebody else's code, right, that you're downloading locally. They might create their own functions, their own variables, right? And they might be very disorganized, and they might be declaring all sorts of global variables, right, global functions. And those globals are going to compete with your globals, right? They might overwrite some functions that you wrote, or you might write a function that overrides their functions, right? So it's going to be a collision of namespaces, yes? So it's very common, at least on the client side, to create namespaces, right, where you protect, you create bubbles, right, of namespaces so you don't collide with somebody else's namespace, right? And one of the ways that you do that is you use anonymous functions, right? You don't give names to your functions. You need them, you declare them, and you throw them away, right? They never had a name, so they don't collide with anyone. Okay, but I believe there are other ways of not colliding with namespaces, but making the code read easier. It's very hard to read that you have all these nested anonymous functions all over the place, right? I think this is so much easier to read and understand. Anyway, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines of code, and we have a running server. Let's run it. So we're going to say node server.js. Okay. So notice that what's this doing? Right. It's listening at IP address localhost, right, 127.0.0.1 at port 3000, and it's waiting. It's just waiting. Notice that it's just there, sitting there, not doing anything, waiting for incoming requests. And we have configured one single URL pattern, right, /. So if I go back to my local, right, which used to be this, right? Well, now it's not 8080, right? Now it's 3000. 3000 is a very common URL amongst mean stack developers, right? It's a very common port that developers use. So if I use this, notice that it says hello world. You see that? Not very exciting, but just pointing out that in in 6 lines of code, maybe less, right? We can have a running server listening for incoming HTTP. Yes? Notice that it's not a file. We never sent a file, right? Notice that what it's doing is the function is being called by the express module, right? The framework, right? The framework is calling your function, right? And before it calls your function, what it does is that it intercepts the incoming request, right? It intercepts the incoming URL, right? And the request has all sorts of information, right? The IP address of where it's coming from, right? Any cookies that is being provided by the browser, right? If this is a form that's being submitted, all the name value pairs from that form. All that information is embedded in request, right? That express, right? So express is listening for all those incoming things, right? And it creates an object representation of all the data about the request. When was it created? where's it coming from, what URL is it coming from, right? Any cookies, all that is parsed, right, from text, from the headers, right, from the body of the HTTP request, right? It's all parsed and giving you in this nice, convenient object request. Make sense? It also provides another object that represents the response that you could generate back to the whoever called you, right? Not necessarily a browser, right? Right now, we're mostly going to be using browsers, but not necessarily. It could be just anyone who knows your IP address and your port and the URL. Anyone who knows that, the URL can communicate with you, right? Not necessarily a browser. And this one is just using the response object to send the following piece of text. Make sense? Everybody okay? Now the URL is the default. You'll notice it says slash, right? It's just says hello world. We can change this, right? We can change this and say hello world 123. If I refresh, notice that it does not update, right? I changed the server. I would need to restart the server. You can set it up so that the server.js is watched, so that if you make any changes, right, it restarts the server automatically. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to stop the server, and restart it manually. If I refresh, notice that the change took place. Okay. All right, that wasn't very exciting. Let's change it so that instead of a slash, right, I want to change some other URL. Right? I can say hello. Okay, I want, this URL will generate the hello, right? So if I restart the server, and I refresh now, it says I can't get slash. I don't have anything mapped to slash, right? There are no resources mapped to slash, right? Only if you say hello, right, maps to that particular function call, right? Now here we're just sending back just plain old text, but we're not limited to just plain old text. We can create another route, right? These URLs, when you use them in this context, right, they're referred to as routes, right? And the .get is often referred to as you're configuring the routing of your web server, right? The route, what routes map to what, okay? And so we can also send other things, right? So we say, send JSON, right? And here we can put a function, an embedded function. So it's a throwaway function that receives the request and the response, right? And I'm going to send back JSON, JavaScript data back, okay? And so we're going to send and say we can create maybe var users, right? And it's going to be an array of users, okay? And they're going to have maybe it's going to have a username Alice, and first name Alice, last name Wonderland. Okay, and we can create a couple more. Let's create here Bob, and this would be Bob, and this would be Hope. And let's create one more, and this would be maybe Charlie, and this would be Garcia, right? And what we could do is, actually, I'm going to change this. I'm going to call it API/users. Okay, and so I can choose whatever URL I want, right? It's arbitrary. Okay, although later on we'll talk about that it shouldn't be arbitrary. It should follow some logic, right? I don't know if I mentioned on Tuesday about RESTful web services, right? The syntax, right? The format of this URL is very, very important, right? It means something, right? So there's some expectations of what that URL should be, right? So we can use the response to send back. I can use send, or send is very smart. Send will look at what it is that you're sending, and it'll format it appropriately, right? It can say, oh, it's text. All right, I'll just send it as text. Right? It'll use the correct MIME type, right, to send the correct piece of data. So I could say here users, if I can spell. Okay, it knows that this is JSON, right? It says the MIME type that I'm going to use is JSON, right? But if I know it's JSON, it's better if I just use the .json, right? This is specifically for when I know that the data is going to go back as formatted as JSON, right? So if I restart the server, notice that right now it doesn't work, right? If I say API users, I'm going to say nothing maps. Oh, the server's down. Server. I'll restart the server, and if I refresh, notice that I get JSON, right? I have a plugin in my browser that when it sees the MIME type JSON, right, then it it pretty prints the JSON and makes it so that I can navigate the objects. I can collapse. But really, what comes back, the source is just plain old text, right? Plain old text of JSON. Notice that it added the double quotes everywhere, right? Even though I didn't add them, right? Although it's a good practice to quote everything in JSON is the appropriate. But the IDE is forgiving. The language is forgiving, right? But this is the standard format, right? All the properties are quoted, all the values are quoted as well, right? Except if it's another object, obviously, right? Or if it's a literal number, right? Or it's a literal Boolean, right? Those are true, false, or the numbers, right? Those are not quoted. But strings certainly are quoted, double quotes. Everybody okay? So there it is. This is our very, very first RESTful web service, right? And we're going to see lots of this, lots and lots of this, creating our own web services, fetching data. Okay, remember the architecture, right? All the static is downloaded on the browser, and then the JavaScript of that static is going to go back to the server asking for data, right? And says, oh, I need to render my recipes. It's going to go back to the server and says, give me the recipes. The server is going to fetch them from the database. It's going to go back with a JSON object, an array of recipes, right? And then Angular is going to use that array and render it maybe as a table, as whatever, right? And so here's our very first web service. Okay, but not only are we going to be hosting data, right, we also want to be able to host static content, right? Just plain old HTML files, plain old CSS files, right? For that, we need one more line of code. Express. If you search for public, now this additional line of code is going to turn on our ability to just host just static content, right? We're going to copy it. We're going to paste it here. Now, what this says is that I am configuring where to fetch the static content, right? And we're telling it that we wanted to fetch it from the current directory where Node.js is running, right? Which is CS5610 Spring 2016, blah, 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 right? The physical location of the current directory name of where we are, and under a directory called public, right? So we're going to put all our public content, all our HTML, we're going to put it inside of public directory. So we're going to create a directory. Public. So there it is. Anything we drop in there, right, is considered to be public, accessible from anywhere, right? As long as you know the URL, you can get it. Anything outside of the public directory, it's not going to be available. Right, so our index page there, that used to be our splash page, our home page, that's no longer available. Okay. Also because in the previous server.js, it explicitly, hosted this particular page, right? Just sent it back using file system. Using the file system, it read the file, right, and it sent it back verbatim, right? Here, we're using a more generic, a more general solution, right? Anything you drop in this directory, if you know the file directory, the virtual location of this file, you can get at it. So let's put our index in there. Let's put our index in the public. So yes, okay. In public, we have the index, right? That says welcome to CS5610, right? And let's restart the server. Instead of me copying and pasting, and running Node server, I would suggest you create a runtime configuration. Right? I've created one already called server.js, and what it is, server.js, you can create a new one. You can say plus, create a Node.js, not a remote debug, a Node.js. You can create a new one, right, and call it, server, right, and then says it's going to run Node in this directory, and the JavaScript file that we're going to run is server.js. I'm going to say OK. And say OK. Now that you have a configuration, what this is going to allow you to do, well, obviously it's going to allow you to just run it right here. But it's going to allow you to also debug it. You see that? You're going to be able to, set breakpoints. Okay, there are breakpoints. Step through your server code, right? If an incoming request comes in /API/hello, right? It's going to stop the server on its track, and then you can step through what's going on in the server, right? And it's behaving weird. Why is it not working? You can locally you can debug it. Okay, very, very powerful, right? You can see the variables, you can see the network connection, you can see everything. So I can run it. So instead of typing Node server all the time, I can just say run it right here. Okay, so now it's running. Notice it's running here, Node server. So I can go back to my local. Where's my local? This is it. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to refresh. Yeah, I still have API users. And I can access that index page, index.html. There it is, welcome CS, because it's in the public directory, right? So now there's the slash maps to whatever is inside of the public directory. Okay. One of the things that if I don't have it, if I don't say index.html, notice that it's still HTML. Yeah. So index.html has a special name. That name, index.html, is a special name, right? It has a special behavior. Okay. It means that if you don't provide a specific name for a file, right, it's going to, by default, look for an index page, right, in that directory. If it finds one, that's what's going to send you back. It's going to send you back that index page, right? And as the name suggests, the intent in that index page is to, just like an index on a book, right? In the book, right? The book is pretty big. The index is a very short way of finding things in the book. Same thing, index, the intention is that from the index, you should be able to navigate to all the other places, either in that directory or throughout your entire web page. Yes? Right? Okay, so locally we have that. And let's see. Say hello. 3,000. All right, so notice that this is only going to work locally. It's only going to work locally, right? It's 3,000. I'm not using any of the I'm not using the IP addresses, right? I'm not using the port numbers that I would have to use for it to be able to be successful when it runs on OpenShift. If I push this, right, I'm not going to be able to have this work remotely, right? Because it's using a hard-coded 3,000, right? And it's using the 127.0.0.1 IP address. So this won't work remotely. So I need to massage this a little bit so that it'll work both locally and remotely. Okay, I need to calculate what the IP address should be, right? And what the port should be. Okay, I need to know what that is. What do I do? So that's why in the assignment, I give you a snippet on how to do that. Okay, these 2 lines of code right here. I'm going to copy them. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to paste it right here. And this says, calculate the IP address using this Boolean expression. Okay? It says, look at my environment variable, right, for an environment variable called OpenShift Node.js IP. Well, guess what? My environment variable does not declare this this environment variable, right? So this is going to be undefined. Okay. So my Boolean says, well, if this is undefined, then use this instead, 127.0.0.1. That's what the OR says. The OR evaluates to whichever is not undefined, right? Truthy, right? Whatever is truthy, right? Maybe anything that is not 0, empty string, length 0, false, right? Undefined. This one too, locally on my machine, I don't have this environment variable. Okay, so it's going to evaluate to 3000. So the IP address and the port are going to evaluate to local variables. And the listen, I'm also going to copy that, and I'm going to replace this listen here. And what this says is that use the port that you calculated, use the IP address that you calculated. Remotely, when I push this to the remote server, these variables are going to be existent. They're not going to be undefined. Okay? It's whatever the IP address that, it's in the remote environment. Yes? And whatever port number is in the remote environment, whatever they're using. Typically, it will be just 80, port 80. Okay? But now my code works in both places, right? Let's first verify locally. So in the run, I'm going to stop the server, or I can restart it, restart my server. I'm going to restart my server, and I'm going to try it out locally. Let's refresh, because locally it looks like it works, right? Looks like I can still go to API users. Yeah, so that still works. Remotely, this doesn't work, right? Remotely, I don't have /API/users. It doesn't exist, right? But I'm going to push now. I'm going to commit. I'm going to go to version control and says that I modified index, I moved it, and I modified server, right? And I can select both and go to VCS. I'll say you have that. So I says moved index.html and simplified server.js. Okay, and say commit and push. And push. Once I'm happy the way it works locally, I then push. So remotely, if I refresh, it's going to say for now, it's just the service is temporarily unavailable. I can look at the progress. I think it's done. I'll refresh. So there it is. The API users is there. So that's running. Right. Also, the default index page is running. So that works, right? And this should be your spectacular homepage, right? And it should have links to your assignments. It should have links to your project. At least 2 things, right? For this course, at least those 2 things. So your homepage should be spectacular and give access to your assignments, your projects. It should have access to your GitHub, your public GitHub, right? So we can go quickly and view this. And you should submit this URL, right, into Blackboard when I make Blackboard available. Right, so submit for the requirements for this assignment is submit the URL to this project, right, to this URL and the GitHub, the public GitHub. Okay. All right, I'm gonna leave it here. Any questions? Yes.
That means that application follows the MVC architecture.
Yes, certainly.
So where the express comes in, it's like a controller.
It's going to be the service, right? That is going to be our interface with the HTTP protocol, right? It's an interface of, it's like a facade, right? It maps incoming URLs to something that handles it, right? It's like a handler, right? It's an event handler that comes in, right? And then it maps really handles all that, right?
So
yeah.
So then, what does the Angular play. So it's like Angular and Express are all together,
Yeah.
act as a controller, or it's like
Yeah, so Angular is going to also have, we're going to have two MVCs. Right? We're going to have an MVC on the client, right? That's going to have its own model, its own view, its own control, its own service layer, right? And the service layer is going to be responsible for sending these URLs, right? And parameterizing the URLs and providing parameters and all sorts, right? And then on the server, Express is going to map, is going to be the interface by exposing to anyone who knows the URL, right? Exposing it. So it's going to be incoming HTTP handler and mapping it to logic, right? And the logic will then be your API, your model is going to update the model, right? And respond with a new model, right? With having been manipulated, which will then come back to the service in Angular, which will then update the model in the Angular side, and which will then be rendered on the Angular side. Okay. All right. Yes. Yes.
So what is that?
So it says that at least this, right? Or it could be higher. It could be higher, but at least this version. You could say there's several operators that say anything less than or greater than or exactly equal to this, right? Or something that is close to this, right? Either, and you can go down to version number or subversion number, right? You can pattern match the exact version that you want, right? Or you can give it a top level version. It says anything within this version family, right? Anything within that version family. Yeah. All right. I have office hours right after this. If you want to come and chat a little more, I'll be in 460A in West Village H. All right. See you then. Thank you.